Hello, Woodmont Student Ministry. I'm coming to you from like a YouTuber vlog setup, and this is different and exciting, and I'm excited to talk to you guys about life groups for this week and what we're going to be talking about in class this week. So if you'll stick with me, this is a little bit new. I'm filming from my office. Now I really feel like a YouTuber. This is my office if you've never seen it. And I have a camera that I'm going to set up right here by my computer. And have my notes on my screen just behind you. So if you see me look over here, that is why. So stick with me if this is awkward. I apologize. We're trying something new this week. But Tatum and I were talking, and we think it's important that as you guys are going back to life groups, and we are so excited to see you and be with you, that we're also giving you something to talk about. When we meet normally, we always have class, and we always have some kind of teaching or some kind of activity where we're looking at the Bible together and seeing what it has to say for us, and seeing what it has to say for our community. And we don't want to lose that, even though our life groups look a little bit different than they normally do right now. So for at least this week, we're going to try it. We're going to see how it works. I'm filming this lesson, as you probably know if you're watching this. If you don't, this is going to be the lesson for life groups for this coming Sunday. And I'm going to try to film myself teaching, and it's going to be a little awkward, but what we're hoping will happen is that you'll watch this before you come to life groups. And then when you come to life groups, you'll be able to go straight to your group and be able to have discussion about this lesson, about what we're talking about. And your trail guides will have discussion questions so that you guys can still talk about this lesson. But this will help us be able to go straight to our groups and everyone stay safe and us not have to be in one big space together. If we try this for a couple weeks and it doesn't work, we'll switch it up. It might not even work this week. But we're going to try it, see if it works, and if it doesn't, we'll change it. So this week, for class, if you will, I want us to talk a little bit about community. And community has looked different for all of us over the last couple months. But I want to specifically talk about loneliness. And that might seem out of the blue, it might seem obvious, I don't know how that strikes you, but I want us to take a couple minutes to talk about loneliness. And what the Bible has to say to us about loneliness and community. And if that feels like a little bit of a downer, if you were excited to watch this and I'm getting on here like, let's talk about being alone, I don't blame you. It does feel like a little bit of a strange topic. But I'm hoping that as we get into this lesson and as we get into a couple of the texts from the Bible that I'm going to read to you, that you'll see that this isn't out of the blue, but this is actually something that's very important for us right now. Because I know that some of you are probably feeling pretty lonely. And if you're not, I think there's a challenge here for us to help others who are feeling lonely. So I'm going to get into it. Again, I'm sorry if I look over here. It's where my notes are. But I want to start with this. So we've been in quarantine for basically 6 months now. I don't know exactly when it started for you, but it's been about 6 months. And we live in a world where we are more connected than ever. You have your phone. You have your PlayStation or your Switch. You have Zoom or these other different online vehicles of how we're connecting and how we're still able to see each other and talk to each other, even if we might not always be together in person. We're more connected than we ever have been. But it also seems like we might be lonelier than we've ever been as well. I mean, it seems as if despite all of our connections and all of our technology, we still long for that human interaction and for being in the same space as each other. Despite everything that connects us, we can still feel lonely. And I want to start with us talking about, and maybe normalizing a little bit, we all experience loneliness. I know for me, you guys have probably all heard me say I moved around basically every year growing up. The loneliest day of the year, every year, was the very first day of school, when I'd walk into a school and I wouldn't know anyone, and it would be lunchtime. And when it's lunchtime and you don't know anyone, you have to figure out where you're going to sit. So I'd walk into a cafeteria and go, I don't know any of them. Or, I had my first class with that person, they seem nice. Or, that doesn't look like a crowd that I'm going to go sit down with. I'm not really a skateboarder, I probably don't fit in there. And it was this overwhelming sense of loneliness and an overwhelming sense of I don't belong. And I experienced that just about every year, the first day of school. I know for some of you, you've experienced loneliness pretty profoundly over the last 6 months. For some of you, you've had to quarantine. And you might feel like you're stuck at home. You might not fully understand why your parents aren't letting you go outside or why they aren't letting you go be around your other friends. And you might experience this loneliness in a pretty deep way over the last couple months. Maybe you still feel this loneliness. I know for others of you, your parents are letting you do stuff. You are out seeing people, but maybe you experience loneliness because your best friend you can't go hang out with because they're quarantined. And you can't spend time with them face to face like you normally would. Even in the Bible, in the Psalms, in Psalm 25, it says, "I am lonely and afflicted." So even the writers of the Bible, the people who wrote the stories that we read about God, experience loneliness. Again, Psalm 25 says, "I am lonely." It's something that all of us experience, no matter how connected we are, or no matter how spiritual the writers of the Bible might have been. We all experience loneliness. We are not the only people to ever experience loneliness. I am not the only person to ever experience loneliness, and you are not the only person to ever experience loneliness. So where am I going with this other than just talking about how we all can feel lonely sometimes? I want us to talk about for just a moment how God cares for the lonely, and I believe that we should as well. So in the Bible, if you go all the way back to the story of creation, it starts with God creating Adam, right? He creates man, and he's all by himself, and he says, "You are here to watch over the whole earth." And when Adam falls asleep one night, God reaches into him, and he pulls out one of his ribs, and he creates Eve, or he creates woman. And God looks at them and says, "It is not good for man to be alone." God knows that even from the very formation of the earth, even from the creation of the very first human, we aren't created to be by ourselves. We aren't created to be lonely. I'm not sitting here saying that everyone is created to be married. It's not where I'm going with this. Where I am going with it is I do believe that we are all created to have close relationships with people. We're all meant to be in community. We're not meant to experience loneliness. In Psalm 68:6, it says that God himself makes a home for the lonely. Say that again. Psalm 68:6 says God makes a home for the lonely. And so I want to ask you, how can our youth group, how can our church, how can you, might be weird me pointing at a camera, how can you be a home for the lonely, like how Psalm 68:6 says? How can you be a place where your friends experience this type of family? How can we create an environment where people don't feel lonely? The Psalm says that God creates a home for the lonely. Are we that kind of home that God is creating? I hope we are. I hope that we are becoming that if we aren't already. But this is where I want to camp out for just a second. In John chapter 16, verse 32, this is right before Jesus is crucified, right before he's taken and arrested. It says this. Jesus is with his disciples. Again, this is John 16:32, and it says this. "But a time is coming, and it has already come, when you will be scattered, each to his own home. You will leave me all alone, yet I am not alone, for my Father is with me." Let me read that again. This is a little bit creepy considering what we've just been through the last couple weeks or last couple months. John 16:32 says this. "But a time is coming, and it has already come, when you will be scattered, each to his own home. You will leave me all alone, yet I am not alone, for my Father is with me." Jesus is saying to his disciples, the people who are the closest to him, his closest friends, that yes, you guys are with me right now. You guys are around me, you're following me, you're listening to me. But there is a time coming very soon where you're going to leave, and you're all going to go to your own homes. He's not saying you're going to quarantine, but functionally, they're all going to go to their own houses and stay there. And Jesus is saying, I'm going to be alone. So even the creator of the world, his son, Jesus, looks around and says, I'm going to be by myself. But then he goes on to say, I am not alone, for my Father is with me. Jesus took comfort in knowing that his Father would never leave him. He didn't just wallow around in sadness because he was alone and his disciples had left him. He took comfort knowing that his Father was still with him. And we have that same promise that is given to us. Jesus had his Father who watched over him and cared for him and who he spent time with. And we have that same offer. We have that same promise. If we look for God, if we run after him, he'll meet us there. If we try to spend time with him, he will meet us there. And we can take comfort in knowing that we are not alone, for our Father is with us. But I think there's another element here as well. Because Jesus didn't just take comfort in knowing that his Father was with him. He did one other thing. The other thing that he did is, even though he knew his disciples were going to leave him, he still created community for them. He still tried to be friends with them. He still tried to hang out with them and let them spend time with him. It was something very intentional that he chose to do. So even when we are feeling lonely, or even if we are feeling like our friends are leaving us like Jesus felt, we still have a challenge to create community and to build community for those that are around us. So let me maybe ask this in a couple ways here as I finish. Even though we each experience loneliness, I experience loneliness. Some of the last few months have been extremely lonely for me. They've been very difficult, and I know they've been the same for you. So even though you and I both experience loneliness, we are called still to create community for those around us. So let me ask a couple questions to you right now. Number one, what would it look like if our group, if me and if you, if our youth group decided we're going to take a stand against loneliness? What would it look like if we decided that loneliness had no place here? That we are people who are going to fight against loneliness. Because I think we've already established that we've each felt lonely. I want you to think back on that time and some of the questions that you're going to have in your life group on Sunday night. We're going to ask about a time that you felt lonely. Remember what those feelings were like. And then don't just sit there, don't just wallow in those feelings, but remember that you have an opportunity to look at other people around you who might be feeling those same feelings of loneliness and to reach out your hand and to try to create community for them. It's something that we have the opportunity to do with our youth group and the way that we live our lives. Is we realize that we have been rescued from something, but that's not the end of the game. That's not the end of the story. We now have a part to play. We can offer that same hand to someone else. So what would it look like if our youth group was a place where we took a stand against loneliness? While you're in your groups, I'm gonna ask your trail guides to do a couple things that are gonna walk you through when was a time that you felt lonely? What was that like? What were the feelings like? What was hard about that? After you sit there for a moment and talk through some of that, I'm gonna ask them to ask you what we can do as a group, or what you can do to try to create community for those around you, to try to create community so that we can take a stand against loneliness and be a people where loneliness doesn't happen here. It's not something that we want to be a part of. And the last thing that I want to say, as I close my Bible to finish, is we love you. I have so dearly missed being with you in person over the last couple months. When we were together 2 weeks ago for Life Groups, it was wonderful. When you guys all left the church, I just sat down exhausted, but it was a good kind of exhausted because I've missed being with you in person. And those of you who joined us online, I was so grateful that you still chose to tune in. Even though you couldn't be with us for whatever reason, I was so grateful to see you. And I hope that didn't feel too awkward tuning in virtually to an in-person event. But we love you guys and we have missed you dearly. And we want this to be a place where you feel like you belong. We want this to be a place where loneliness doesn't belong. And I know that has not always been the case for some of you, and for some of you the last few months have been difficult as it relates to church and youth group. So I ask for your forgiveness. I ask for some grace from the last couple months. But we're excited to be with you, and we're asking you to join us in making sure that this is a place where loneliness does not exist. So we love you. I'm excited to see you guys on Sunday nights. I hope this vlog style lesson wasn't too awkward. If it was, don't worry. We don't have to do it again if this doesn't work or if this is a total disaster. But we love you guys. We can't wait to see you Sunday night from 6 to 7:30. See you then.